Our club has always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas. Here, we offer access to dynamic political, business, and public personalities.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
We're ready? Happy Pride, everyone. Woo! My microphone's not on. Hold on, wait. Is it on? Now it's on. You can hear me now? Happy Pride, everybody. I am so nervous. It's crazy. This is my 40th event as president. Woo! It is my last event as president. Woo! And it's a gay event! That was like Oprah moment. Thanks for being there with me. My name is David Simmonds. I'm president of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and I'm absolutely delighted that so many of you chose to spend an evening with us here tonight to celebrate Pride, to recognize progress, and to push for continued advocacy. I'd like to talk about the Canadian Club as a place that tells Canada's story, that is a platform for us to create meaning, to expand the margins, and to define belonging. And I also like to talk about the Canadian Club as a place where I am not the first. I'm not the first black president. I'm not the first gay president. And I certainly will not be the last. And it's really powerful when you think about the fact that the Canadian Club is in its 125th season. So I'd like to just toast the Canadian Club and cheers the Canadian Club right now. Let's cheers the Canadian Club. When I think about the Canadian Club's history and its 125 years, I also want to recognize that we're delighted to be here once again at Navigator, a friend of the Canadian Club, to host our Pride event. It's become an annual event. And it's become an annual event because of one of our past presidents. I want to acknowledge that Navigator is a sponsor of tonight's event. And I also want to acknowledge that this is a bit of a homecoming for me. I'm proudly wearing my Navigator pin. I am part of the Navigator alumni, as I like to refer to it as the diaspora. And it's a homecoming for so many reasons, because home is a place. Home is a place of challenge. It's a place of coaching. It's a place of push. But it's a place of unconditional belonging. And I want to acknowledge that the executive chairman of Navigator, one of our past presidents at the Canadian Club, is a person who I met 15 years ago, who said to me, number one, you've got something special. Number two, it's time to own the power of your blackness and your queerness. And number three, you should really come to Toronto, because Ottawa is a place that's really not that much fun. And so, Jamie, I want to ask you to come welcome us to your home this evening, and thank you for all that you've done for the club and for me.
Well, thank you, David, and welcome, everyone. I feel a little bit like I should be running in a trifecta tonight. I'm welcoming you as Executive Chairman of Navigator, along with a number of my colleagues who are here to our home where we work every day. I'm the past president, as David said, of the Canadian Club, and I'm a gay man. So there's three, and I guess four. I was David's former colleague, so there you go. We're not the first people to work here. We're not the first people to gather here. People, of course, have been doing that for millennia. Many nations. We single out the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, then Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of Credit, but of course there are many other nations from over Turtle Island that have come here and done work actually very similar to the work that we do today. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission made popular, or more sort of au courant, these kinds of land acknowledgements. And with it, they actually made them quite performative. And I think a lot of people read the same script time after time after time, and it's a little bit like telling people where the bathroom is. At Navigator, we take a different approach. And we recognize that the land that we're on is part of the Dish with One Covenant Wampum Belt II Treaty. And we try to live the values of that treaty every day in our work. And they're very simple, and they're actually not that hard to do if you keep them in mind. The first is make sure you take what you need. The second is make sure there's something for someone else. And the third is leave nothing behind. And so that's what we try to do here every day. So with that, in that spirit, I welcome you all. I hope you stay afterwards, and we've made sure that there'll be a great party afterwards. And with that, I will just say Miigwech and Happy Pride. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jamie. We are tremendously proud. That was a joke. Thank you for laughing. To be hosting yet another Pride event at the Canadian Club. It's a direct reflection of our values as a club to ensure that the people that are telling Canada's story reflect the Canada that we want to be proud of and that we bring together. They're a reflection of our board. We're very proud to have one of the most diverse boards. I'm going to just say it's the most. Do I have data to back that up? No. Does Colleen Kennedy have data to back that up, our executive director? Yes. And we're very, very proud of that. And this evening's gathering is an example. I have a number of directors in the room. Wave, please, if you're here. We thank you for your service and your contribution to the club. We are also live online to thousands, hundreds of friends. And this is the first, I'm really nervous, and this is the first time. So I worked at Navigator. Jamie prepared the press release that I'm coming back because my colleagues from Great West Lifeco and Canada Life were also here. So I'm like, I can't make any of my naughty jokes. No, I'm kidding, I won't. There's no naughty jokes. We're going to have a very impassioned conversation about 2S LGBTQ. Katie, here's my gay card. Take it back. 2S LGBTQ progress and the work that still needs to get done. And we are going to reflect on our roles as leaders of institutions, as leaders and voices on Bay Street, as leaders and voices in politics, of how we can make Canada an even better place. We celebrate progress. We celebrate legal progress. We celebrate legal accomplishments. Pride flags are flown all across the city, all across the country. But there is important stories to be told about the intersectionality, the diversity, and the inclusion that is still required within the queer community. And tonight's conversation is about that. We have a lot to share. Before I welcome our guests to the podium, this is, as I said, my second last event as president of the club. It's my duty, I am duty-bound and honor-led to plug the club. So if you would, please join us at CanadianClub.org, buy a membership. I know who bought one and who didn't. Please come to our events in person, and please download our events online, rewatch those, share those, because stories matter, they give us meaning, and you're all part of Canada's story. I want to thank tonight's sponsors. We are sponsored by Navigator, and Jamie's here to represent Navigator. We thank you, Elizabeth Way. Also, thank you for your help planning tonight's event. We are also joined, yes, Elizabeth? We're also joined by the Canadian Bankers Association. Anthony Osler, President and CEO, is here. And I'm going to ask Anthony to come up and introduce our panelists. No. Yes, you can do that. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Just, as a white, heterosexual, cisgender male, when I heard about this event, I said, we have to sponsor it. We've been a long-term sponsor of the Canadian Club, but not had the opportunity to sponsor this specific event. I'm hoping to sponsor it for many years forward, and I'm super excited to be here. I love the energy and feel very fortunate to be back in Canada. For those of you that don't know me, I've spent 8 years living in the U.S., and I'm incredibly thankful to be Canadian and to be back here. So with that, my formal remarks. This Pride Month and always, Canada's banks are proud to stand with our two SLGBTQ communities and continue the march toward full equality. CBA member banks employ almost 300,000 people in this country, and each of them can feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. For many years, significant work has gone into identifying and eliminating barriers and where they exist for diverse populations, accelerating the diversity of underrepresented groups at all ranks. When banks talk about their support for diversity, equity, and inclusion, including at events like this one, it is because it truly reflects their communities. Banking is fundamentally a relationship business, as Katie would know and probably will share with us. How we treat people matters, and when we advocate for each other and treat each other with respect and dignity, we rise together. With that, I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, Katie Dudtschak, Executive Vice President, Regional Banking, Personal and Commercial Banking at RBC, and Andrew Kriegler, President and CEO of IIROC. Katie will be in conversation with the President of the Canadian Club of Toronto, David Simmonds, obviously our lovely host, and will then be joined by Andrew for a broader discussion. I also just want to make a side note here to congratulate Katie on receiving the 2022 Catalyst Champion Award, which was announced last week and will be celebrated this fall. So we'll have more chances to celebrate Katie, but I'm just so proud of you, and you're such a great example, so it's fantastic. It's well-deserved, and you think about her trailblazing, the work that she's doing, and the progress for all women through workplace inclusion is really, really impressive and heartwarming. And then with that, of course, Katie's brave journey and leadership is an inspiration to my family and me. My wife and I are proud parents of two trans girls, and they're now at post-secondary age, and one of the reasons why I could come back to Canada and be kind of empty nesters. They're going to be going to school in the GTA, going to residence, but they can come home for Sunday dinners and tickle their dogs. But for the four of us, Katie's one of our sheroes, and we're very excited to hear what she has to say tonight. So thanks, Katie. And with that, over to Katie and David to get started. Let's have some fun.
Thank you.
Katie, where do you want me? Seat right there.
This one?
Yep.
Can I have my wine?
You can have your wine. It's an evening event. And with that, can I ask if you're able and you have a glass to stand and join us in one of the club's traditions, a toast to Canada.
Canada. Cheers. You weren't so nervous after all.
Girl, I am sweating. That's why I wore blue. I put on a white shirt this morning and said, bad call. Wear a dark color. And here we are.
Okay.
What do you want to talk
about?
You. Okay. Stop. You're making me nervous. Okay.
No need to be nervous.
So
you just should expect anything to come out of my mouth.
Anything?
It's not uncommon. My mother used to say when I was a child,
yeah,
Katie, one of these days your mouth is going to get you into trouble.
Was she right?
I've gotten into trouble along the way. Less lately than I used to.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. I want to talk to you about your story.
Okay.
A number of people know Katie, but a number of people don't know Katie. So why don't you just give us the starting point. Who is Katie? What should we know?
So you used the word intersectionality earlier. So I'm a woman. I use she and her pronouns. I am a proud parent and mom of 4 incredible children. I won't tell you which ones are part of the 2+ LGBTQ blah, blah, blah community.
Don't worry, straight people, we get it wrong too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you did, so
twice.
2S plus LGBTQ community.
Can I just tell you, the global head of diversity from our glorious company is here, and we had a meeting once, and she was like, "What acronym should we use?" I was like, "I don't know." Just kidding. Let's go.
But I'm a parent, and I can now proudly say, "Mom." My kids actually, for the first time in my journey, reached out to me on Mother's Day and wished me Happy Mother's Day. And for me, there are people within my community, and the reason I say my community is we'll talk about the term transgender at some point. I'm not a huge fan of it. I accept the term transgender as a useful label to help people find their truth. The reality is I did not transition my gender. I affirmed my gender.
I might have transitioned the cover of the book, but I didn't transition gender. I affirmed it. I finally embraced, who was inside of me all along. There are people within the community that still go by male pronouns with their children, and I just couldn't. I was so clear by the end of my journey that I'm a girl. I was wired emotionally, intellectually a girl from the beginning, that calling myself or identifying as a woman, she, her pronouns, being called by my children a mom is like the greatest affirmation I could ever get in my life. I also have other intersectional experiences. So I'm an onion like all of you are. I'm a child of newcomers to Canada. My mother was a child refugee in Germany. My father was a Russian POW in Eastern Europe or in Eastern Germany. They brought and you think of the indigenous community and intergenerational trauma. They brought their intergenerational trauma to Canada. They were struggling farmers. I had a home full of anxiety and a home full of screaming and yelling, which today we call verbal abuse. I struggled in public school to learn. I'm sure if you diagnosed me, I would come out dyslexic, although I've never been officially tested, but I knew I wasn't dumb as a kid in school. I could see the answers. I just couldn't explain them in a way that the school wanted me to. So I dealt with teachers that looked at me like I had 3 heads or laughed at me. I was picked on for my last name in school. When you have a name Dudtschak, that can be easily turned into duck shit or do F. You grow up with, you aren't far from being intersectional or having layers to your character. And so I have a variety of human experiences. Candidly, my early experiences at home on the farm and my learning challenges on the farm and growing up in a relatively poor family allowed me to hide from my gender for almost 50 years. Like, Katie was there all along. I can tell you, at 5 years old, creating Kleenex, remember girls, you'd take Kleenex and you'd sew it together and make dresses for your Barbie dolls? Like, I can picture the chair that I was at sitting on the floor creating clothing for dolls at 5 and 6 and 7 years old. I remember clearly 12 or 14 years old going into the sandbox with my sister's bra on and underwear on, stuff full of Kleenex, with boy clothes on over top and going to play in the sandbox. Like, I remember spending hours in my mother's jewelry box, not my dad's boring underwear drawer. I've got countless experiences where I either felt more aligned to women and the way women behaved and thought and expressed themselves, or how, or girl things. And if you follow the transgender community, as you will know, like, many of these things start to get expressed very young and very early. So I remember that. But because of those other experiences early in life, I became fiercely determined that I was going to prove to my father that I could build a better life than he did. And that I was going to prove to those teachers that I wasn't dumb. And I went on a path. At about 13 years old, I quit working for my father on the farm, and I went and worked for the next door neighbor farmer.
Oh, wow.
Picture how my dad felt.
Competitive advantage.
Oh my God. Like, I feel guilt for hurting my father. But I became pretty rebellious. On the surface, I was polite and fun, and I worked hard, but underneath I was rebellious, and I was going to prove to the world that I could build the perfect family, the perfect life, the perfect career, the perfect home. And that served me well for 45 years. The whole time, under the surface, was Katie bubbling up every day, and then me being busy and work-wise or family-wise and pushing her down until I could no longer push her down. And in our community, we call it the dam breaking. It's the moment you finally find words for your story. It's the moment at which you, your job isn't as busy anymore. Your work becomes more intuitive and it doesn't require as much physical energy or emotional energy. Your children get older and don't need you as much. Your marriage matures and it's not as exciting anymore. Like, whatever it is, those things eventually happen. And then if you've been suppressing something or hiding something, it eventually boils over. In young people today, it can happen at 4 and 5 years old. In my case, it was 45-ish when it really started to bubble. And then it was roughly 50 when it overflowed. And I still didn't have words for my gender or for myself. I didn't know what transgender was until August 25th, 2017, when some of you will know my dear colleague Lawrence Spicer. I booked him for lunch and we went to Key, and it was August 25th, 2017, 12:30, and I said, what the hell is transgender? And the reason I still had a blockage at that point and I said to somebody earlier tonight, I was mixing gender, which is who you go to sleep as, with sexual orientation, which is who you go to sleep with. And that was what he said to me. He says, they're two totally different things. I said, well, Caitlyn Jenner, I said, how can she be Caitlyn, and I won't use her assigned name, her chosen name, and still like girls? And I go, like, to me, that's a dude in a dress wearing, pursuing women. That was how much internalized homophobia about myself that I'd built up, that I was looking at Caitlyn saying, this is fake. This is just another reality TV show being built. And he goes, no. Like, Caitlyn was Caitlyn from birth. She struggled with her gender her entire life. She just happened to be born in the wrong body. And science point, by the way, your brain develops at a different trimester than your physical body does. And they now believe that there's either a DNA issue, or not an issue, a DNA thing, or a hormonal shift in the mother that causes the brain to develop with different characteristics than the physical body does. So anyway, Lawrence says, well, Caitlyn was Caitlyn all along, just born in the wrong body and suppressed it forever. And I go, really? And he explained a bit more about Caitlyn. I go, oh my God, that sounds a lot like me. And then I said, yeah, but how can Bruce become Caitlyn and then still be attracted to girls? And he goes, well, they're totally different things. Gender is gender and sexual orientation is sexual orientation. And he goes, Caitlyn's a lesbian. And I go, oh my God. At that moment, you could have pushed me over with a feather.
Yeah.
And that was the turning point. That literally, in that second, in that moment, was the turning point for me. And then my life went to hell in a handbasket.
We're going to get there in a second. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about origin story. You talked about the experience of your parents. You talked about the experience on the farm. When you read about your story, you're open about, and I might get the expression wrong, knowing both sides of the coin. I made that part up, but both sides of it. Important part of my origin story is, my blackness, my faith, black liberation, those pieces. I heard someone earlier in the audience. I was like, yes, sir, got me going. So what is it about your origin story that either helped or maybe created a bit of a challenge for you as you sought out Katie?
Challenge for sure, because as I said, I was obsessed with proving to the world that I could build a perfect life. There is no such thing as a perfect life, and money does not make anybody perfect. But I was obsessed with proving to the world that I could build a better life than my parents had, or that I could fit into the masculine world, that I could prove I was smart enough. Well, that took a lot of energy. So those are things that hurt, or certainly caused me to take a lot longer than the average, woman like me to figure out my true gender. On the positive side, my early life experiences of being a child of newcomers, whatever country you've come to Canada from, I can empathize quite clearly with this idea of moving to a new country where you don't speak the language and people look at you like you've got two heads because you speak with an accent, or you've got a weird last name that nobody can pronounce. Weird in the English context, normal in the context of where you come from. And so I've from a pretty young age, I had empathy for people that had chosen Canada as their second home or their ultimate home. I had empathy for underdog kids in school because I felt like an underdog kid in school. And I had, I have colleagues at the bank that always talk about, I'm a cheerleader for the rock stars, that defy all odds. And I go, I'm a cheerleader for the underdogs. Because I'm a cheerleader for the people that have, gone through life's hard knocks and have overcome those challenges. So those things served me well in leadership jobs earlier in my career. And as a parent, even though I wasn't fully at peace with myself. So, and then more recently, I can now speak to, the third and probably the most important thing that's on your mind is you've tried to exist in a masculine world and you're now in a female and feminine world. Like, what's that like?
Yeah.
And I'm not intimidated by any men, and because I've lived in that world and I know how men are wired, and I know that most men are as insecure as any female, in some cases more insecure than most females. And I know that many men themselves are anxious with the fact that they too struggle with fitting into this very, very masculine identity that especially the corporate world or the construction world or whatever creates for them. I have a colleague on my team that confides in me all the time about, I don't watch sports, Katie. And I like shopping more than my wife does. And I hate to admit those things at work because I won't fit into the guys' world. And so I know those things. I've also sat in the locker room where, women, you should know this, where some of those masculine, men trying to be very masculine and fit into a very left-brain, cerebral, linear way of thinking, try to fit in is the important word. Like, we're all unique is the bottom line, male or female or whatever. But I've sat in those locker rooms. And what women should know is that some of those men, or many of those men, that are on the extreme side of masculine spend more time talking about women than women ever spend talking about men. And so it's a sign of insecurity. It's a sign of lack of awareness. It's a sign of lack of empathy or understanding. So I've seen all of that, and I've also seen the other side where I don't know too many women that spend their extra moments, lamenting about the guys. They're too busy for that because they've got families to raise, or they got yoga to get to, or they got work to get done. And I don't mean those as judgments at all. That's just called living a whole life and a complete life and trying to balance it all. So I've seen both sides. And probably the important lesson for everybody to take away, regardless of gender, regardless of origin, is that, and thank you for the indigenous acknowledgement and the land acknowledgement, is just this idea and this fact that each of us are whole human beings struggling to fit in, and that the world that we live in is a post-colonial hierarchy, post-colonization world. And that has driven into our world unconsciously, male or female or whatever, unconsciously, biases about how things should get done. And on Bay Street, it's quite logical and normal to be more cerebral, more left brain, more subdued in order to advance your ideas. But that's a byproduct of colonization. That's a byproduct of religion. That's a byproduct of military and the way military advanced and became embedded in political systems and the rule of law, etc. But it's just history. It doesn't need to be that. There's no real rule book that says you can't be emotional in a boardroom. There's no rule that says you can't be sensitive as a human being in a boardroom or with clients or with employees. In fact, some of the best leaders I know are incredibly vulnerable and are incredibly authentic with the employees that they lead, and yet still can make the toughest business decisions, in the world. They just come at it from a holistic place and a place of purpose rather than a place of rules. Mm-hmm. So I've seen both sides. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on Indigenous tradition and where all this has come from. And, because I have a lot of privilege in my role and the incredible company that I work for, and the perspective that I bring, I think it's important to use your voice for good and to create a kinder, more inclusive world.
Well, thank you for using your voice. I think it's important and it's powerful and it's had impact for sure. I want to talk, you mentioned leadership. I want to talk to you about leadership for a second. How many of you are in a leadership role in the audience? How many of you have 100 people in your org? 200? 300? 400? 500? 1,000? Katie has 15,000 people in her organization. She services 15 million Canadians. That's like basically half the country. I guess I should open an RBC account, eh?
Yes, you should.
Let's do that right now. David, you're welcome. Mackay, that's the CEO. So talk to me about that. So it was June, I think 2019, when you came out as Katie to the Royal Bank.
88,000 people.
I came out to like 3 people. And I remember, my friends would keep me honest, you were at a restaurant in Halifax, and the boy that I was, with,
having fun with,
walked into the restaurant with his parents, and I broke my wine glass in my hand, and my friend was like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I'm gay." And I felt like, oh my God, Shonda Rhimes, write a TV series. But you did 80, what? Talk to me about that. Talk about vulnerable leadership, armored leadership. Brene Brown has nothing on you. Talk to me about what that was
I
like.
love Brene Brown.
So do I.
And I do believe vulnerability is a superpower. True authenticity and vulnerability can never be associated with ego. But it is a superpower. Superpower sounds kind of egoic. But back to the way the business world or the legal world operated for millennia or decades in Canada, I do think there's a whole other way of leadership. I call it inclusive leadership. I call it authentic leadership. I call it sustainable leadership. These are all terms that we could spend the whole night defining. But I had learned enough lessons. I had let Katie out of the closet. Maybe not the physical expression of Katie and my name, but I had let aspects of my personality out of the closet over 25 years. And I remember a defining moment in about 2002 where I'm doing a leadership review, a 360 leadership review with a man that I held on a pedestal who unfortunately died at a young age of brain cancer. But I was the boss in Ottawa. And I said, John, what is it you're so creative, you're so expressive, you're so much fun, you're such a great leader, but when push comes to shove and you need to take a risk, you hold back. And all I said to him was, where does that come from? And it's funny, whenever I ask the question, where does it come from with somebody, they never tell me, last weekend I did this. Every time they go back to their childhood and they go, when I was a child and my parents took a risk, every time it went wrong. And I promised myself I would never let things go wrong. And he's in tears talking about his childhood. So that was like the most important moment in my professional career of creating an emotional connection with a colleague and experiencing his vulnerability, and then we're both crying.
Yeah.
And I've had many experiences since then. I was the CEO of our bank in the Caribbean, where Fortunately, we had 6,000 extraordinary employees in 19 countries in the Caribbean. Unfortunately, we had some less than long-term oriented leaders that built a house of cards bank that fell apart out of the financial crisis. And I was the person asked to go in and restructure the bank. And I said to a colleague, a senior leader at the time, of the past, I said, why don't we just tell employees we're losing money and that we have to save the bank? He goes, no, we'll tell them when we're done. And I go, what do you mean you'll tell them when you're done? I said, we're on the cover of the newspaper every week for terrible client experiences, for the bank falling apart, RBC's a bunch of losers in Canada. And I go, why don't we just tell them the truth? Oh no, we'll tell them when we're done. Well, eventually we got to telling them the truth. And 2 years later, our workforce was 40% smaller. We had retooled every product line in the business. Unfortunately, we made a choice to hand off 2 countries to other companies that were better able to run those companies going forward on a sustainable basis. And we're 40% less employees. And employee engagement improved 11%. So I had enough life experience to say, honesty and transparency is probably your friend here, Katie. So when I created the critical path to come out, tell Dave, the CEO, tell my boss, Neil, tell Helena, the head of HR, go to New York and see myself in the mirror to make sure I really like Katie. I'd never seen myself in the mirror until after I came out to the CEO.
Wow.
On the way home from New York City, after seeing myself in the mirror and go, oh my God, I love myself. And I do genuinely love myself. I can say that for the first time in 56 years. Some of you knew me before. I was pretty talkative and pretty expressive. I'm like 30% more. I'm just that much more at peace with who I am. And I get to express all aspects of my being. But then on the way home from the plane, I wrote the critical path. I'm gonna write my coming out letter. We're gonna tell the board of directors. We're gonna tell group executive. We're gonna tell my direct reports, the 11 senior VPs on my team, and then we're gonna come out to the employees. And I had said to Dave Mackay, one, I need you to learn so that you can empathize with my journey. 2, I prefer your partnership. And Dave was the one that said, well, we should do a video with Katie. Neil and Dave and myself do a video. So on June 17th, 2019 was the video. And it went out to 88,000 people. And it was the old version of me holding up a picture explaining my story of what I'd struggled with and hidden from the world for 50 years, and explaining that my kids were going to be okay and that my kids were supportive, and that my spouse was the first person I ever told my truth to, a week after the lunch with Lawrence Spicer in 2017.
Wow.
I had so much guilt that I thought I had betrayed her. And so I told all of this stuff on the video. But my fundamental belief was, if I was going to preserve credibility or any stitch of trust or credibility with the 25,000 people on my team at the time, now it's 20, but I had to show a level of honesty and openness that they would say, okay, she's just not fallen off the apple truck, off the milk truck, that this is actually real. I needed to show that level of honesty and vulnerability and transparency. And it was a bit of a bet. Right up until that day in June, I still was believing that I would be judged and rejected by the world, that I would be ostracized, that I would lose my job. Right up until that day, albeit all the reactions, the RBC board of directors, senior management, my direct reports were beyond amazing, profound. I thought I was going to be judged and rejected by the world, because when you deal with something so intimate and vulnerable that you've been hiding for so long, you have built up every story known to humanity about your truth, all the bad ones. And the total opposite happened. And it is, so not only has my coming out changed, advanced my level of authenticity and transparency as a leader, like, it's so funny, you know, in corporate world, you spend a lot of time in the boardroom talking about, or senior management meeting, well, what are we going to tell employees? And let's get the employee story straight, and then the management story straight, and then, you know, what are we really doing? I have one story at the bank. I tell everybody the same story. And I always spend most of my time on the why of the story. But the greatest gift I got as a leader wasn't my personal coming out. It was actually the hundreds and thousands of emails I got after, where colleagues, employees from across the world, not only talked about bravery and, oh, you're going to help other people, which I still struggle with because I did it to save my own life. I literally was suicidal at the worst part of my journey. But I got to hear women talk about being verbally and physically abused. I got to hear, a woman in our insurance division talk about multiple generations in her family from Jamaica of family members that were gay and were hiding it from the world out of fear of being stoned and murdered in Jamaica. And, you know, an East Indian colleague in Vancouver who immigrated to Canada, who ostracized his best friend for telling him he was attracted to guys. And how this colleague in Vancouver, who's heterosexual, cisgender, East Indian immigrant, had been carrying guilt of ostracizing his best friend back at 15 years old. Why? Because he not only ostracized his family, his best friend was put into an arranged marriage, and a year after the arranged marriage, he committed suicide. And his comment to me was, Katie, I've carried this guilt with me for years. I've never told anybody. You're the first person I told the story to. And I just hope through stories like yours that we build a more open, accepting, embracing, and kinder world. And like, I was in tears reading his email. So I have hundreds and hundreds or thousands of gifts of stories like that were before George Floyd, that were before residential schools, that were before anti-racism riots. And I just felt like I had an opportunity. At work, we deal with employees, the tip of the iceberg of the employee. You come to work to do the job the company asks you to do. And most companies and leaders don't spend any time or little time getting to know the whole human being, what sits underneath the surface of the job mandate. And I felt like I had this unique opportunity and time to see more of the whole human being and the fears and the hurts and the worries that most of us carry around that cause us in certain business environments or community environments to hold back and to suppress parts of our beauty and parts of our uniqueness. And I also have, for a long time, ever since that talk in Ottawa with John about his childhood, and I've kind of carried that on in my leadership. When I have somebody on my team, I get to know the whole human being. And some of the stories are quite public. Martin, who runs British Columbia for RBC, has quite openly talked about losing his mother to suicide at age 24. And if you know Martin's leadership, he carries the weight on his shoulders like no other leader. It's so unique. He leads from the front. He supports his employees from the back. He advocates for his employees with head office more aggressively than anybody. And I say, well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from the fact that he, as a child, felt the burden of caring for his mother. And he carries this feeling that he never wants to leave anybody behind because he lost his mom. And I know two white guys that watched their siblings die in childhood that has shaped the kind side of who they are and the nurturing side of who they are. I know two white women on my team that packed the car to evacuate the house and mom because dad was an alcoholic and physically abusive. And they were the daughters that didn't even convince mom to go, forced mom to go. These women are among the kindest, most nurturing women because they have empathy for other human beings and hurt, but they are also among the most determined and, tough, resilient women I know. So when you look at what sits under the surface of all of us, the hurts that we carry, these early childhood experiences that we carry, the experiences I have because of growing up with post-Second World War parents, or that you might have from, your country of origin or your journey. Like, the reality is as hard as all those experiences are and cause you to hold back, they're also the things that make you the most beautiful, unique human being you are. And when you see them in leadership jobs and how they manifest themselves over time into extraordinary gifts and strengths, you realize that diversity is truly a strength. And it's not the diversity, it's not the blackness or the gayness or the transness or whatever. It's the experience that comes with that makes you the empathetic, the resilient, the more aware human being that you are. You talk about your two daughters. They will grow up wiser, more resilient, more empathetic women and human beings than they would have otherwise. So when I talk about human uniqueness as a way of defining diversity, it's because of that. It's because these hardships, these differences, ultimately, and the layers of them ultimately over time manifest themselves in just in a level of human beauty that is really special. And so why wouldn't we create a world that allows for more of that to be known, more of that to be seen, more of that to create a shared sense of human empathy, and more of that so you can bring your gifts, wherever they come from, to bear in the society and the world that we live in. So that's my leadership journey.
I want to welcome Andrew to the stage. Andrew, if you could join us. Everyone, welcome Andrew.
Super dad.
Andrew is a super dad. And, Katie, you talked about one of the powerful experiences was your children calling you mom or recognizing you on Mother's Day. Andrew, you're the father. I'm going to let you tell your own story, but you're a dad. You're an executive. You're a leader. Why don't you tell the room a little bit about you and your story and why you're here today with us as an ally?
I guess the first thing I would say is I wish I had heard Katie speak 9 years ago before Artie came out to us, because I think I probably would have handled it a little better. The reason I'm here today, well, kind invitation of the Canadian Club, but the reason that I wanted to be here today is because there's two things that I'd like to convey. The first is, if you're a parent who is accompanying your child on their journey, it's not my journey, it's theirs, then you're probably going to get some stuff wrong. I know I did, and we'll talk about that for a minute. The second thing is that as long as you can understand that you did get some things wrong, and that the only thing that matters is that you support your child will still love you all the way through. And believe me, I pooched some stuff pretty badly. And when David and I were talking about this panel, he asked me to think about telling this story through a couple of events as a way of bringing it to life for you and really opening up to the experience that I had as a passenger in the car that Artie's driving throughout life. There are three. The first one is when Artie came out to me at around 14. The second one was when Artie chose his name, which was a couple of years later, a little bit less. I remember the events, the dates have now started to go a little weird. And then the third was about a year ago when Artie had gender-affirming surgery. And each one of those is memorable for a different reason. And I think the arc is a positive one certainly a positive one, one that gives me hope. I'll say it that way. For our relationship as father and son, and maybe a little bit for our society, that we can have these conversations and we can move forward as family and come out better on the other side. So, to begin with, Artie came up to me in the car. We're driving. We live in Lawrence Park, and I can remember the drive, and I had obviously sensed something. Artie had gone through a period of wearing dresses which he never liked doing, but he went through an entire summer of wearing dresses. And it was, in retrospect, of course, it was clear that he wanted to see if this thing can work or not. And eventually he realized who he was, and it wasn't going to fly. I had interpreted that as potentially a sign that, of all of the things that I was seeing, as a sign that maybe Artie was gay. So I was ready for that. I wasn't ready to hear Artie tell me he was trans. And it wasn't that I was contra the idea. It just didn't process. Mm-hmm. I mean, Artie at that moment could have been speaking in Martian. The words, they didn't mean anything. I mean, I heard them. And so what's the worst possible thing you can say? Let's try for, are you sure? That took us a while to get over. That took us quite a while to get over. And I think the first... So, then the reaction is, okay, I got to support my kid and whatever. But I don't even understand what I'm supporting my kid in. And there's a learning experience and a processing experience that has to happen there. At least it did for me. I'm going to fast forward a little while to when Artie told us the name that he had chosen for himself. And then the legal name change and stuff came a little bit later. Waited until he was legally an adult to do all that, of course. He had been seeing a therapist to help through some of the issues that he was dealing with, rather few of which, frankly, had anything to do with his gender identity and his awareness. But this had obviously come up as part of those conversations. And Tracy, my wife, who's here with me tonight, and I were invited to come talk to the therapist with Artie, because Artie wanted to walk through some stuff together. And that's when he told us that he'd chosen the name Artemis. Now, there's all sorts of classical reasons for that name. I won't go through the history for you. You probably all know it better than I. But the thing that still causes me almost to go into tears, so I'm going to try not to, is that even though Artie had Artie in mind as the short form for his name, he pointed out to us, and I think probably more to me than to Tracy, that a reasonable short form for Artemis is Temi, and Temi is pretty close to Emmy, which is what we used to call Artie when he was young. And the fact that he put in the time, the energy, the thought to make it easier on me. It's not about me, but that's what he was thinking about in part. I want to end this. This is hard. The third sort of vignette I want to talk about is Artie's surgery, which happened last summer, as I mentioned. And I think it is an arc, and a very positive arc, because it took Artie a while to make sure that he was comfortable with it all, that he was ready for this, and there are some decisions, but when you move past it, you don't go back. And so he wanted to be comfortable with this, and he was last summer. And I guess there's two things about that I want to say. The first is that you've never seen someone so happy as when they looked themselves in the mirror and they saw the person that was always there. The second thing is, I was happy for Artie. So happy because, and this is where I would end for you, this little set of stories. The only job you have as a parent is to support your kid. And if they know that you know that, then you're going to be okay.
Katie and Andrew, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna take questions from the floor. Colleen has a microphone. Can I just say, we've had this story matters so much, and it matters because it's a signal that business cases matter, as Katie mentioned, and remember, Andrew is also works in the finance industry and is a finance professional. Linear thinking matters, business cases matter. The moral case for doing what's right matters. And the Canadian Club podium has welcomed Prime Ministers of Canada, Margaret Thatcher, Presidents of the United States. David Mackay was here this season. And this story matters the most. I am so proud to welcome Andrew and Katie to our podium so that we can talk about what it means to show up, to be recognized, and to be included. Questions from the floor? I have many, but if anyone in the room would like to ask a question.
Where's the Kleenex?
I know, that's why I was like, get me a tissue.
Don't be shy.
Hi, thank you both for your generosity and what you shared tonight. That was really, really powerful. I had a question for Katie. I have met many genderqueer people. I've met many non-binary people, and you talked about your community, our community, the trans community, and I'm just curious to hear your perspective as one person on just trans can sometimes be viewed as relatively binary, and a more younger sort of modern movement into non-binary, as in you pick and choose from the gender that you want and that you express as you would like. And I don't know, if you have any thoughts about sort of that evolution and where things are going.
Yeah, for sure. Number one, as a leader of many people, and it fits a bit with your point as a parent, get with the program because that's your future.
Yeah.
That's the next generation coming. Like it is. I think those are your words earlier for tonight, but they keep showing up for me. The world just is. Stop trying to make it right or wrong. These things just are. And yeah, we can spend days debating human evolution, nature versus nurture, all these kinds of things. And they can be debated because I've had to reconcile them all for my own existence. In my case, so what I do know is my own journey. I can't speak for another human being's journey. In my journey, I kind of saw the masculine world and the uber feminine world, and then somewhere you cross a threshold of calling yourself a boy or a girl. And I kind of thought I always thought I was kind of close to the middle, and I thought I was going to move over the line to the girl side. And at one point in my journey, from August 2017 to coming out, about 6 months in, I had a few close friends on my journey with me. And I asked them to I clearly had a visceral reaction to male pronouns. Like once I went into it, it took a month. And it was like, oh my God, like that does not fit. It never fit, and now it clearly doesn't fit. So I tried to convince my friends to use, and there was like 4 or 5 of them, to use they, them pronouns. It caused me more stress than male pronouns because they kept messing it up. And then they kept wanting to have an intellectual argument with you about the English language and grammar. Or they'd mess it up and they'd say, oh, Katie, you're a good guy. And like it'd be a perfect evening, and then right at the very end, they'd say, oh, you're a good guy. And like depression would kick in. Literally, it wasn't only anxiety, depression would kick in. And you'd go into a death spiral for days. Dead naming does the same thing. Hearing your old name or your old pronoun, as erroneous as it can be, puts you into a death spiral. It can trigger anxiety and depression in the moment. Not because the other person's a bad person, but because it means you're not being affirmed as your true self. It means you're being questioned. You're interpreted as being questioned, or not real or authentic. And I can assure you, your son, your daughters, like, this is a very real human experience that people go through. And the reality today, look at the dress I'm wearing, look at my hair, like I'm over here. I may not be able to dance like a ballerina, but I wish I could. My hands move, my voice, moves. Like, yes, I can still drive a tractor, and yes, I can shovel gravel as good as any boy can. But like, I'm feminine, like I'm over here. There is no question in my mind that she and her pronouns and the name Katie works for me. Like, it is who I am. But who am I, to your question, who am I to decide that somebody is less real or authentic because they feel comfortable? They may grow facial hair, but they feel comfortable expressing themselves in a dress. Or they feel comfortable expressing themselves with makeup. Or they prefer they, them pronouns. Like, who am I? And does it need to be fixed? Can it change depending upon the day and how you're feeling? Some days I wear shorts as a woman, some days I wear slacks as a woman, and some days I wear a dress. Why does it matter? So I do have a ton of empathy for individuals that know, feel, believe, know that they're non-binary, that they are fluid. And candidly, I wish the whole world was they, them pronouns, because then we wouldn't have this freaking problem. And there are languages in the world where pronouns don't exist, the way that the English language defines them. So I wish it didn't exist. I wish we could give everybody a crash history course on about 1,000 years or 1,500 years of human history, and you would see that the expressive dressers and the expressive expressions were men, back to medieval times or Roman times, etc. And then you'd say, oh my gosh, all of this masculine and feminine extremes is actually modern history. It's not long history. It's not indigenous. It's actually a newer phenomena. So I don't have the answer for it. I literally wish we just were all they, them pronouns and got used to it, and you were the name that you chose and you were the expression that you chose, and we were all good with it. Yeah. I do believe, though, as parents, as community leaders, as corporate leaders, you better get used to it really fast. And if there's visceral reactions that you're having, have enough heart and empathy and intelligence to realize that maybe there's something that you're missing. Maybe there's something that you're missing, because all that really matters is that they're seen and heard as real human beings. Yeah. And putting them into boxes only is going to hurt your company. It's only going to hurt society, because you're going to miss out on some level of intellectual or creative potential. Yeah. So anyway, that's my perspective on the topic.
Tanya has a question in the audience.
Thank you. You're two very special people to me, so thank you. My question is actually for Andrew, and not to put Tracy on the spot, but it's wonderful that she's here as well. So you talked about what you didn't do right. Can you talk about what maybe the two of you feel you did do right, or what maybe Artie would say you did do right?
Well, I think the one thing we did well, and this is more Tracy than I, because I think she had a better level of understanding, intellectual, emotional, visceral, however you want to categorize it, much sooner than I did. It doesn't. You're the person. Artie is the person we love. Artie is our child. And I think if we are, you need to support the actions along the way. So changing of the name legally, helping with the consultations for surgery, all of the things that help the person on their journey. I think we did some of those pretty well. But all of those are built on one foundation, and that's the one I was talking about, which is this person is the person you love, period. Everything else kind of follows from that. Did I screw up the pronouns along the way when yup. Did I feel terrible about it? Yup. I said a couple of minutes ago, and it was an analogy that sort of occurred on the spot, so it's not a great one, but Tracy and I, are simply passengers in the car that Artie's driving.
Beautiful.
It's a great analogy.
Beautiful. Well, what do you want out of a passenger? Well, don't cause trouble and drive the car off the road would be a good start, right? Make the journey a more pleasant, positive one. Because it's life. I mean, yes, life comes to an end, our physical existence, but until that happens, it's a journey that we are on every day, and you want it to be a good one.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That is beautiful. There's a question here. Do you have a question? And then John, and then I'll take one more question and we'll wrap things up because there's lots of wine.
Awesome. Thank you. It's Pride Month, so we all know that every single logo on LinkedIn has been converted into a rainbow.
Yeah.
But what I've found is that throughout the year, there might not be the same level of support or recognition of the LGBTQ plus community. What recommendations as leaders, because I see 3 leaders at the front of the room, do you have for organizations to truly support their employees throughout the entire year rather than just the key months like Black History Month or Pride Month or Women's History Month? How can organizations truly adjust to moving away from that reactive approach and into a more of a proactive approach?
Andrew, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I guess the first reaction I have is to note that you, in your question, highlighted 3 different occasions throughout the year. There's, as we all know, there's a lot more than 3. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of my colleagues here who lead IIROC's Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism Committee. And one of the things that they've done with all of their colleagues for us as an organization is to highlight the rainbow in not only in terms of in every color of the spectrum that we are as human beings, because there's something that is happening every day in our existence that means something to a person, a group of people, a shared experience. And the more that we acknowledge that, the more that we celebrate that, the more that we talk about that, I think the more we all realize that the strength of our humanity comes from our diversity, the richness of the human experience. You had better words than I did, Katie, but that's what makes us who we are. And so you're right, it can't be this month or that week or that day. It's every day.
Katie?
There's 2 or 3 things. Number one, whether Census Canada measures 3 or 4 different dimensions of human uniqueness. As a company, number one, you should measure as many as you can. And you need to make sure that your staffing protocols are looking for diversity every frickin' day. Like, diversity is just a fact. Inclusion is the secret. I think we all believe that. But you still have to advance diversity at all levels of your organization. So if you don't staff for it, if you don't make sure it's on the staffing list, if you don't make sure you've got a society reflected in your succession pipelines, you're not doing your job, number one. Number two, companies need to invest in training, whether it's anti-racism training, whether it's what we call 4 seasons of reconciliation, to tell the truth for the darkest 150 years of human history in Canada, for indigenous people, or, et cetera, you have to train. You have to train. 3, you have to role model and train for inclusive leadership. And inclusive leadership is a thing. It will be in textbooks soon. It needs to be. Because there is an act of leading with care and kindness and bringing people in and getting to know beyond the tip of the iceberg, getting to know the story of the whole human being. And that takes leaders showing a level of what I call kind curiosity. It's lead with care and kindness, there's no egos allowed, and be curious about different human experiences. And you're going to find out a lot of horror stories. And you will walk away a more aware and a more humble and a more empathic human being. But you will also understand where that individual's incredible gift and strength comes from in their background, in their being. And so you have to advance inclusive leadership. It's the hardest part of the equation. At Black Lives Matter, we started a practice. I started a practice in the division that I lead, and we still do it to this day, only every couple of months. But I host an inclusion dialogue, and it's a 15-minute webcast that goes out to, now we do it to 3,000 leaders, and I'm going to start doing it to all 20,000 people, depending on who you count or who you don't count. But in 15 minutes, all I do is I introduce the individual and some of the intersectionality of their being and the role that they have and what makes them special as a leader. And then I say, and tell me the story of a time that you felt hurt for being black. And, or tell us the story of how hard it was to come out as gay. Or tell me a story during COVID of what it's like to be in Vancouver and experience anti-racism abuse in your neighborhood. And then I go to, and what advice would you give to leaders for how to create a kinder, more supportive environment for you at work? And then anything else you'd like to share. All I have is 3 basic questions. But everybody, without fail, is blown away by question number 1 is because they never walked in the shoes of the other person. And they never knew what it was like. And then the person describes it. One of the more profound ones, well, they're all profound, is a Métis woman who's now a regional vice president on Vancouver Island with RBC, Annette. And Annette told the story of her mother, who's a residential school survivor with trauma, who abandoned her as a child and put her into the foster care system. Annette put herself through high school alone, living on Kraft dinner, because she had fallen out of foster homes. You look at Annette and you go, she's one of the kindest human beings you'd ever meet, yet one of the most determined human beings you'd ever meet. And when you hear Annette's story about her mother and how she's finally now reconciled with her mother, you're blown away. You go, oh my God, now I get the indigenous story. And oh my God, I thought Annette was incredible before, and now I realize she's even more incredible. So, But facilitating a discussion like that, and all it takes is 15 minutes, but some leader has to role model how to be kind and curious about another human being's experience and not pass judgment. You just ask questions. And then the fourth, every one of you, you better measure inclusivity and employee engagement in your company. We have an inclusion index. It was in my nomination. Our inclusion index in the division of the bank that I lead is 10 percentage points ahead of the rest of the organization.
Here, here.
And it's moved several percentage points in the last 5 years. And I've not done anything other than being my real self and facilitated training and inclusion dialogues in the division. But you better measure inclusivity, and you better have an employee relations group. When something smells weird, they go back and they do their investigations to see where bias or judgment sent that employee down the wrong path, so that you can root it out of your culture, you can root it out of your leadership. But those are 4 practical things that leaders and companies need to do 365 days of the year, not just during Pride Month, and not just for those of us in the LGBT community. Yeah. Those are my thoughts.
I'll be quick. I think those of us who are minority identified or equity seeking identified and in a position of power, so we're in leadership roles, we control influence, we have an obligation to be more of ourselves. Because by being more of ourselves, we create license to enlist other people to take that permission. I don't say it because we're here. I say it because it's true. Working for Jamie at the time in my career when I worked for him was an opportunity to be more of myself. I remember being around the water cooler at a smaller office. It was still beautiful, but a smaller office. And I was talking about a weekend I had in the village. And I was talking about someone I met, and I was using they pronouns. Not because I met that person and they were genderqueer, but because I was used to being veiled with what I was doing. And Jamie leaned over and said to me, if you're comfortable using he, him, you can do that. And this was 15 years ago. And it was just like a waterfall of relief. So if we are in a position to do that, we create license for other people to do that. I think the second thing we need to do, all of us, those of us in equity-seeking population, those of us not, if you're in a leadership role, be unapologetic about learning. Again, before I joined Canada Life and Great West Life, I was at a US-based company, and the leader I worked for at the time had very limited exposure to the Black community. And he was very positive about my LGBT identity. We were in an instance where we were at a very special place. Someone came up to me, asked me for something. It was a very anti-Black experience because they assumed that I worked in that facility and was not a guest of that facility. And he said, oh my goodness. And he said to me, I need you to be more Black. Talk about unleashing my potential and my permission to be fully me in that environment. I remember I came back from California where I was working at the time, and everyone was like, David is more gay and more Black than we've ever seen. I was like, thank you, Brian Tyler and McKesson. And the third thing I'd say to all of us, for cisgendered white men are our allies in this.
Totally.
They are allies in this. And we need to create space, and I'm going to get yelled at in angry emails. We need to create space and be compassionate for cisgendered white men to learn with us, to fail with us, and then to unleash the systems and the colonialism and the oppression that's held us back. If my CEO wasn't the person he is, compassionate, thoughtful, learning, openly making mistakes, we would be nowhere. Yeah. And the same is true for our divisional president in Canada. So I would say, let's create that space where they're called to the moment and can help break this shit up.
Totally.
John, one last question.
I think you've partly answered my question, David, with the statements you just made, and other folks have too. But it's great to work with people who are open and want to learn. But unfortunately, in the world and the U.S. and even in Canada, we're in a time where it is a very frightening time, where extremism and people who don't want to, not only they're not open, they're actually anti-open to learning and understanding and loving. So I don't know if any of you have any suggestions on how we're going to deal with this going forward, because I have really serious concerns politically, even in Canada, but around the world and what's happening, and how do we move forward and make sure those 10 steps forward we've made in our journey don't become 15 steps backwards. Yeah. I mean, Berlin in 1939 was culturally open and expressive, and then it wasn't, and it got really dark. Dark isn't even the right word, but...
Katie?
I wish I had the answer. Yeah, I'm glad you asked it. I literally, when I came out, back to a pretty amazing white man, Dave Mackay agreed to putting security at my house because I was deathly afraid of somebody in senior role, relatively public, much more public now, much more public now. I was deathly worried about my life and being beaten up. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was worried about getting beat up because it would hurt. And there are examples in Toronto where transgender people have been murdered, often in the sex trade because that's their only way of existence. So it's what you're uncovering, we all know is very real. I have two thoughts. Be parents like this, where you are the passenger in the car, but if you see not only a pothole, a cliff, that you tell them to put on the brakes and to turn right, which may mean as a parent that you might have to change schools, you might have to change the environment to protect your child's well-being, and it's not an uncommon occurrence. No. So that's the tactical side of protecting your loved ones from harm's way. I think the ultimate answer is your answer. The more you stand proud, the more we tell stories, the more we build acceptance, the more you stand in your true self as a human being. Hopefully everybody walks away realizing that you're an incredible dad and that you're an incredible human being and that I'm a real and authentic human being that can still lead 20,000 people. Is that the more people see this, they go, oh, my theory, my racist theory was wrong and I have to change. Because eventually, my dear friend Andreas, who came out gay 30 years ago, who's also autistic, says, Katie, one thing you have to know and understand is that political systems and socialistic movements do this. Yep. But human nature is unstoppable. Like, this will not stop. But politics, and especially protectionist politics, that feel many times like a last-ditch effort to protect a perceived form of supremacy that is no longer relevant in the world, in this globalized world we live in, is a last-ditch effort to hang on. Strategically, you can't stop human nature. You can't stop human beings from being human beings if more and more of us step out and claim our voice. And I ultimately think the answer is, it's a little bit about policy to our government leaders around. It is in June of 2017 or 18, Canada's human rights laws changed to protect gender identity and expression, in addition to gay marriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our human rights laws changed. So policy does matter, but the real answer is leadership. The real answer is parents, friends, and leadership. Because the reality is no leader on this planet is going to untap human potential the way it needs to be untapped in the future without embracing the whole human being. You just can't. We're not celebrating, physical muscle and strength the way we used to thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago. We're celebrating emotional and intellectual muscle in the world that we live in today, and no leader can untap it. So I don't know many leaders that don't get this concept of tapping into human potential and creating more inclusive cultures so that more people can bring their true and creative and intellectual selves to life and to work. So, I think the most important part is to do what you described and to stay the course. And be willing and ready to watch out for the landmines and course correct in order to protect your loved ones. But don't stop being. Stonewall happened for a reason, and it needs to happen every day.
Thank you, Marsha P. Johnson. Andrew?
There will be times in places where we will go backwards. Berlin, 1939, is a good example of that. It's happening not very far away from where we are right now. But those, I think you said it well in quoting your friend Andreas, there's a sine wave in politics, there's a sine wave in social structures. But that is an overlay on top of humanity. And who we are as people doesn't change. What we're prepared to recognize changes. And as long as we all persevere, we'll get there. But there's going to be, we're seeing it now. So we've got to keep going together.
I'd say two things. The first is it's very hard to hate up close.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that.
It's very good. Yeah, that's really good.
The more we are honest and encourage honesty in those around us, the more allyship we build and the more force we have to push against that stepping backward. And the second thing I would say, and it's a call out to my origin story and my evangelical upbringing, I have an affirmation that fear cannot be our future. And that if we can be more loving, look at people who are being othered and say to them that this circle of caring actually includes you. You actually matter in this circle, and we ought to be together in this fight, then there's no more stepping backward. And I think that there's a failure in our politics right now in the Western world. It's that we are not, as progressives, I'm not that progressive, but I'm a little progressive, we're othering those who we shouldn't. And we ought to expand that circle of caring to include people in our words, in our actions, and in our deeds. Katie and Andrew, thank you for being here. Let's hear it for Katie and Andrew. Thank you for being here.
You're incredible.
Am I? Oh, stop. Andrew, can I hug you? Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Courage and compassion were on display today at the Canadian Club. I'm so glad that we were able to welcome Katie and Andrew. And I will say that Andrew and his family had a conversation here, and Artie gave permission for his story to be shared. So I want to acknowledge you, acknowledge Artie, acknowledge Katie, acknowledge your stories and the power that they have as we shape a better tomorrow. On behalf of the Canadian Club, we really appreciate your insights, your advocacy, and your appreciation for the humanity that's required for us to move the world forward. The 2S LGBTQ community is growing in Canada, and we're so thrilled to be a part of it. I'm the third openly 2S LGBTQ president of the club. There were probably many more before me, and hopefully there'll be many more openly 2S LGBTQ presidents after me. Remember what you can do as an advocate and an ally in this journey, and the role that you play in building a better Canada. Before we close, I want to offer another round of thanks to our sponsors, the Canadian Bankers Association. Thank you for being here tonight, particularly, but being our partner over a number of seasons. And to Navigator, thank you so much for welcoming us home, for being our partner, and for building Canada's story. Let me also thank our AV suppliers, Van Valkenburg Communications and LiveMeetings.ca, for bringing us together today and welcoming our digital guest. Members and guests, for the last official time, thank you for joining us. This meeting is adjourned.